What is communication, first of all? How many times have you guys heard it's not about what you say, but how you say it? How many of you have you heard that? Right? That makes all the difference in your relationship. You have to learn to express yourself by listening to others and expressing yourself assertively. Now, the learning objectives for today, what we're going to do is we're going to learn about active listening, we're going to learn about assertive communication, and we're going to learn about communication that's not so good. Okay? So what is active listening and how to practice it? What do unsupportive messages look like? What does mindful communication sound like? We're going to learn about what is intrapersonal communication, and if we have time, we'll do fair fighting. Otherwise, we'll do that next time. So what is active listening and how to practice it? Has anybody heard of what active listening is? Anybody? What is active listening?
Body language engagement.
Excellent. 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 So active listening is the ability to let your spouse or your child or anybody in your family know that you understand them. And how do you do that? You do that by restating the message. You do that by listening attentively without interruption and then summarizing what you heard. It's about listening and responding to another person to enhance mutual understanding, and it's an essential skill for everyone to understand. So the studies show that active listening not only promotes mindful thinking, but it can reduce anxiety and depression, and it helps build healthy relationships. So it helps you let your partner know that you understand them. By restating their message, you listen attentively, you summarize what was heard, and you respond to the other person. Now, what is assertiveness? I'm sure a lot of you have heard assertiveness, but do you know how to be assertive? Assertiveness is the ability to directly express your feelings and ask for what you want in a relationship. How many of you feel like you're assertive in your conversations? No hands. How many of you feel like you're passive? Did this fall? How many of you feel like you're passive in your relationships, in your talks? You say, if somebody asks you what you feel, you're like, oh, I don't care, or what you prefer, it's okay, I don't care, anything is fine. How many of you do that? Come on, be honest, guys. We can't learn if we're not honest. Yes, do you feel that, right? What happens after a while? You know what happens? People stop asking you, oh, it doesn't matter to her. It's okay. It doesn't matter to her. Don't worry about it. Where did my notes go? That fell. So don't worry about it. So what is that? That's passive. So how can you start becoming more assertive if you have that kind of passive thing? What you need to do is you need to identify when you're doing that. When you're about to say, oh, I don't care, stop yourself. Be intentional and be like, no, I'm not going to say that. I am going to express myself. I'm going to tell them, express your opinion. Start with something small. Start by asking, can I have this pen? Can you save a seat for me? Can you help me with this? You start with small things so that you're able to communicate when things become more important. I have an older daughter, and every time I have this, communication with her where you need to get things done, you need to ask your boss if you want a raise. You need to find. She's always like, it's not going to happen. She always assumes it's not going to happen, so she doesn't even ask. But what are you doing to yourself when you do that? You have to ask. Now, the other type of communication is aggressive communication. What happens with aggressive communication? So in aggressive communication, you sometimes seem to come out to be rude, right? Or somebody's like, oh my God, you don't mean to. It's not like you're doing it on purpose. But other people feel like you're somehow not taking them into consideration, right? But when you're in a passive situation, you need to remind yourself that your opinions are important. When you realize that your opinions are important, what happens? You're able to assertively give those opinions because you realize that they're important, right? Your inner attitude of valuing yourself as much as you value others is so important, right? You have to work on being less aggressive and more assertive. Okay, so how can an aggressive person become more assertive? Try letting others speak first. A lot of times when you're aggressive, you just want to carry the conversation. You don't want to let others speak. So try to let others speak first. And notice if you're interrupting people. So many people do that, right? It's like you're talking and you think you know better, so you like automatically start interrupting the other person before they finish their thought. So notice when you interrupt and catch yourself and say, oh, I'm so sorry, go ahead. I was very guilty of this. Like, I did this all the time. And then I realized that that's not the way to communicate, right? You have to stop yourself and be like, no, please finish your train of thought, finish your conversation. And make sure you ask other people's opinion and then listen to the answer. So when you disagree, try to say so without putting down the other person's point of view. For example, instead of saying, that's such a stupid idea, you can try to say, you know what? Maybe that's not the best. I don't agree with that idea. This is what I think, and maybe we can come up with something together. Or instead of saying, he's such a jerk, you should say, he wasn't as sensitive as he could have been on this conversation, because when you start saying these negative things, the whole conversation derails, right? Okay. So, how do we practice active listening? What are the different tools that we need for active listening? First of all, there's engage and respond. Can anybody tell me you mentioned it, engage, right? What do you think engage and respond means? What do you think it means? I think I didn't give out the chocolate last time, so people don't think it's real. It's here now. So, does anybody know? Yes.
React to the different checkpoints throughout the conversation. So if somebody's telling a story, like a big part of the story, we react to it.
Excellent. Excellent. What's your name? Yeah. Okay. Here you go, Ayan. Thank you. So you responsive and actively engage. Say, yes, oh wow, I understand, etc. These kind of things help the other person know that you are actually listening to them. Another very important thing, stop what you are doing when the conversation starts. How many of us do that? I know as parents, when my kids were growing up, or a lot of times we start having these important conversations while we're driving. Now you guys just saw in the activity I did in the beginning that doing two things at once, your attention is not there. So how the most important person in your life, your children or your spouse, how are you going to pay attention to them if you're doing something else? You're not. And that's not going to be active listening. So you need to stop what you're doing and actually listen to what the person's saying. So a lot of times I personally used to be cooking, and when my daughter would come and tell me something, I'd be cooking. So half the times I couldn't read her body language. I couldn't really, I was acting like I was listening, but I wasn't really engaged in the conversation. So that didn't make her open up more. Even at dinner time, don't use dinner time to have most important conversations. Take out a specific time after the kids. If you want a conversation with your spouse, let's talk 20 minutes after the kids go to bed. Or when it's with your kids. When you finish your homework, I'd like to speak to you. Or after Isha, I'd like to speak to you guys for 10, 15 minutes. We need to have a conversation. Set out that time. It's very important for meaningful discussion. Okay. Listen to understand. This is so important. How many of us listen to respond? Yes? Right? Right away, as soon as somebody says something, especially if moms are talking, okay? You're shut off. Right away, you're like, okay, I have a rebuttal for this. If the conversation's about cleaning your room, okay, I have 10 reasons why I shouldn't be cleaning, so whatever she's saying, it's drowned out, and you have no idea. Come on, tell me, isn't that true? Isn't that true? Yes, so you never heard her. You never know where she's coming from. Or even if it's a spouse. Right? We tend to drown out what they're saying because we're so ready for a rebuttal. But now you need to, in active listening, you need to listen to understand. when the other person is talking, and if you're listening correctly, you will understand what they have to say. And what's that going to do? That is going to mean meaningful discussion. Okay. Another thing when listening to understand, another thing that's really important is body language. Notice their body language. As a family, it is very important to understand each other's body language. Right away, if you can see that your dad is stressed or that your spouse is stressed, don't start on a negative conversation. Sometimes, especially a lot of times I live with in-laws, a lot of people that live with in-laws or something happens during the day, husband comes home from work, without even looking at their body language, you're like, blah, 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 blah. Is this a good time? No, it's just gonna set him off. So you need to work on building those relationships, not breaking them down. Another third important thing, let them know that you hear them. So I hear you saying, I can't explain how important these words are in a conversation. It can solve so many misunderstandings. Because a lot of times, what you hear them saying is not what they meant to say. So both of you, you're in that conversation, but you have completely different perceptions and ideas of what that conversation is about, but each of you doesn't know that. So you left the conversation completely on different roads, and you have no idea. Did what I say make sense, or did it confuse everybody? It made sense, right? So if you restate what the person said, so I hear you saying that you didn't like the way I did this, and you would appreciate it if I did it better. Or I hear you say, whatever it is, that starts dialogue. Because when they hear it, they understand where you're coming from, right? And don't make up your own meanings. I know this is what you're saying this, but this is what you mean. If you're gonna second guess everything that a loved one is saying, guess what? There's no communication happening there. Take it for face value and be honest with each other. If you can't be honest with the ones you love, then how are you gonna have a relationship, right? So if you're honest with each other, then nobody will second guess each other. If you know that, you know what, she's gonna tell me the truth, you're not gonna be like, oh, what is that? What are you actually meaning this, right? Because that can drive a person crazy. And instead of saying those statements, ask for clarification, always. Okay, does everybody understand these three things so far? Disagree without dismissing. We will never agree with our loved ones, or we will never agree with everything our parents say, or parents, you'll never agree with everything your children do. But you need to respect them enough to disagree without dismissing them. Dismissing someone makes them feel disrespected. So if you're like, somebody gives their opinion, you're in the car, you're doing something, and you don't know what you're talking about. You know what, you're too young for this, we're having our conversation. What are you doing? Or, you have no idea, you don't have the experience I do. You're dismissing that person and you're disrespecting them. Are they gonna come and have a conversation with you again? Are they gonna try to tell you something? No. Next time, they're not gonna say anything. They're just shutting themselves off. So if you're gonna get them in defensive mode, that's gonna be a battle mode, right? Instead, try, I understand you perceive the situation differently than I do. Let me try to understand where you're coming from, and let me explain where I'm coming from, and maybe we can come up with a middle ground. You would be surprised at what good opinions your children or your spouse or your parents have. Sometimes they know a lot more. I know kids think they know everything, but sometimes parents know some things, So it's good to listen, to really disagree without dismissing them. And then again, finally, listen with care and intent. So set aside time to have conversations, and when you have that time, do not interrupt them while they're talking. And listen carefully, make them feel like you heard them. Now, we, I, and you languages. Okay, I'm gonna have to stand up for this because it's so important. We have noticed with couples and families that have been coming to Anissa for help with our roadmap program and other programs, a big issue, especially with young couples, is me, myself, and I. It's all about me, myself, and I. You're part of a relationship, but it's all about me and I. I need to do this to succeed. There's no we anymore. If you don't have we in a relationship, you are not going to have that inclusiveness. You're only going to create separation. Language is so important. I can't emphasize how important it is. If when you marry someone, you're on a journey together. When you have kids, you're on a journey together. This journey can be so beautiful if you're doing it together. If you separate yourselves, I have to do this. I am so tired. I need to do this. Instead of, you know what, I have so much work. Can you help me so we can have a better relationship? When that we comes in, it brings inclusivity. And then when you discuss things with an I feel hurt when you do this. Instead of, you always hurt me. What happens when I say, you never listen to me? What happens? Defensive. Walls go down. And guys, it's so easy for walls to go down right now because there's so much out there. There's so much social media. There's Instagram. You know, my wall went down with my mom. My wall went down with my spouse. Let me just go on Instagram and talk to somebody else or see what's going on in someone else's life. There's no coming back from that. So you need to make them feel like they're part of a team, and it's not blaming. Put I in there, so that starts a conversation. It starts a dialogue that, okay, oh, you feel this way because of something I did? Okay, how can I change that? Right? Does that simple I instead of you change the whole trajectory of the conversation? Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I would like to add something.
Yes.
Well, conversations between couples is not always conflict conversation, because I could say, which is very appreciated, and active listening is very important when you have conflict conversation. But in order for you to reach a really successful, healthy conflict conversation, you really need to build a rapport with your spouse or with your children. Which means that you really need to be engaging them in friendly conversations.
Yes.
That is not really formal, does not require that formality. You could be cooking and still having a friendly conversation with your husband, right? Without burning the meal because you want to look at him.
Yeah.
You could still hear him, but you're having a friendly conversation.
Yes.
You could be saying something that he's not interested in, but you really is not feeling that it's important to say these things, but you're building a rapport with your husband.
Yes.
Or things like this. So that is what we call friendly conversation, which is focusing on building intimacy or building relationship. Or let's say if you learn how to drive, you're not going to start with the highway, right? The highway is more of a really difficult environment, which is similar to a conflict conversation, but you're going to start with a neighborhood, trip that you're taking. So you're getting used to the car. You're getting used to the driving process. And once you have gotten used to that, then you can go on the next level. And I think that's important to recognize, that we have conflict conversation, and it's too sad that a lot of couples only have conflict conversations. They don't have friendly conversations. So you really need to build up to that.
Yeah.
Well, conflict is a part of marriage, and it will happen,
Yes.
but you need to prepare yourself to be able to engage them in that conflict conversation where you have active listening and all these important rules, definitely. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for that. Absolutely, absolutely. These everyday conversations are, of course, very important, but the reason why it's important to learn how to navigate conflict is so that you can have those everyday conversations. Because what's happening is that you're not realizing the conflict you're creating, and kids are in their rooms, parents are in their own thing, so there's a big separation. So that's why it's important to discuss simple techniques to avoid conflict so that you can have these everyday conversations, which are so important. But we're not realizing how to deal with that conflict, so we're not having everyday conversations because the kids just go to their rooms. I don't know if you've noticed that, but that is a big thing that's been happening, right? So, but thank you for that.
You're
Excellent, excellent point. So I gave you guys a sheet about practicing healthy communication. I'm not going to go through it, but you know, when you're in your homes, I want you guys tomorrow, it's the weekend, so do this worksheet. Practice it with your family, and you'll see what a difference it makes. Did everybody receive a worksheet? Okay, so inshallah. Okay, now another thing I wanted to discuss is unsupportive messages. So what are unsupportive messages? They are verbal tactics that can lead to feelings of defensiveness and separation. So things like global labels. Does anybody know what a global label is? Yeah, yeah. What is a global label? Come on. Yes, yes, that is a global label. You're so lazy. You're a liar. Labeling somebody irresponsible, not trustworthy, selfish. By one action, if you give them a global label identity, guess what you're doing? You are creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know what kids have said to me? Like, they have literally said to me, oh, my mom already thinks I'm a liar. So that one lie led to 10 different lies because I'm already a universal liar. So why should I even tell the truth? Right? We're not understanding that when we say these things, we might say it casually. Oh my God, you're so lazy. You never get up on time because of that one day that they're late. So are you building healthy communication? No. By globally labeling them, you're actually making an excuse, giving them an excuse to do what they're doing more. So talk about the action. Don't go straight to their identity. Because you're creating their identity. You are making them self-conscious and self-aware and making them feel like, oh, I'm lazy. And you'll see now, people are like, that's just the way I am. Nobody even wants to change. Leave it or take it or leave it. They don't mind being alone. That's scary. Another thing, sarcasm. We use that all the time. And it can be funny, it can be humorous. But what does it do? Oh, you didn't miss anything in class. We just sat and looked at each other's faces. You're trying to be humorous, but you're actually giving a negative connotation, right? You're not directly dealing with the problem. You're pretending that it's a joke when really it's not. So it's passive-aggressive behavior that when you're talking to somebody who you're close to, you don't need that. You don't need that passive-aggressive behavior. Be direct. And then dragging up the past. I can't tell you how bad that is for communication. You're talking about something, you're working in the kitchen, your husband's helping with the dishes or whatever, he leaves the table dirty, or your son leaves the table dirty. Suddenly, all the times that, that they messed up comes back to your head. And that small thing leads to an eruption. And they're like, whoa, what happened? Right? It happens all the time. Why? Because you keep thinking about the past. It's unresolved. Okay, you have past issues. Take time. Like Brother Ibrahim said, those are big things. You take time. But in every day, you don't bring up the past for every little thing that happens. You deal with that situation. Hey, you didn't clean the table. Can you come back and clean it properly? That's it. Dealt with, solved. Instead of, this is what you always do. I should have known not to tell you to do. And I'm guilty of this. I'm sure each one of us are guilty of this. And it's these small things, these small changes that will make the big differences.
And you could always ignore the pet peeves. Like if,
yes.
If it's really not that important, not everything is an emergency.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So you could just be a little more gracious.
Yes.
And kind of like, how relationships go from harmony to repair and go back to harmony. So it's okay to move between repair mode and harmony mode.
Absolutely.
So, either spouse can actually do this and say, okay, I'm going to go and repair that hard feelings.
Yes. Another really important thing that I have to stand up for, negative comparisons. How many of us are guilty of that? Okay, do you know what this does? When you negatively compare your child to their sibling or to your friend's child, you're not only creating unrealistic expectations of everybody to be the same. You don't want them to be unique in their own strengths. But what you're doing is that you are creating enmity between the two. You don't even realize how much hatred sometimes happens between siblings or between friends. But you know, a third thing that I have personally experienced. You know what your child does if you're like, why can't you be like this auntie's daughter? She's always getting all these awards that she's posting on Facebook. You never get anything. Why can't you be in the honor society? Guess what they're going to do? They're going to dig up stuff on that auntie's daughter or that auntie's son. You know what, mama? You think that this person is so perfect? Look what she did. What are you doing? You're creating people who put others down to bring themselves up.
Right.
Is that what you want your child to be? Or is that what you want your spouse? Is that who you want to be? That the only way you can come up is if you bring somebody down? Why can't each of us have our own strengths? And we learn to appreciate our strengths, right? Instead of comparing and creating this enmity and creating this dog-eat-dog world where it's all about bringing somebody down to pull yourself up. We're creating that by negative comparison. And I can't emphasize how important it is to stop. If you're doing it, stop, please. Judgmental you messages. Again, judging. You know, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the judge. We are not judges. Yes, as parents, we have to teach our children, but we cannot constantly judge them. There's a big difference between teaching and judging. You're never going to be able to hold down a job. You know, always have a problem with someone. You're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy, because when you do that judgmental, you're never going to be able to do this. When you accuse, that's just bringing that person down. And that's very, very scary. Now, what does mindful communication sound like? Okay, mindful communication is actually being present in the moment. Like Sheikh said, everyday conversations. You're having everyday conversations. Be present. Learn to listen, right? So I want to, again, I would like to study a dialogue between a couple, and we're going to talk about considerate and inconsiderate. So can there be a couple that comes up here? Can I have a couple, please? One couple, guys. Chocolate? We got a couple? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. What's your name?
Nabil.
Okay, Nabil and Asma. Okay, I am going to, sorry. This is, where did? So we have the considerate, sorry. Where did it go? The couple conversation. Okay. I had the considerate. Okay, this is you're going to start with, both of you are going to say this. You're going to be the he and she's the she. Okay? This is inconsiderate. So you want to start with he? You can face this way.
I have to start.
Yes, you're the he.
So I have to pass on.
Yes, you're going to pass it to her. Yes, I can't find the second one. So go ahead and say it.
I'm going bowling tomorrow. The guys at the office are starting a team.
Could you repeat it? Sorry, we'll use the mic.
Yes, perfect.
I'm going bowling tomorrow. The guys at the office are starting a team.
Why can't we ever do anything together?
We can do something together anytime tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day they're organizing the team.
Okay, so why do you think this was inconsiderate conversation?
Because the other partner was not involved.
Well, what did he do when he said, I'm going bowling tomorrow? You did not, did you take her relationship into consideration, that she's your wife, that you need to like, ask her, anything like that? You're just like, I'm going bowling tomorrow, the guys are starting the team.
Yeah.
So when you said that, what did that do to you? It instigated right away, he has time for bowling, but we never spend any time together. You focused on the content, right? Right away you're like, we never spend any time together. And you're like, we can spend time anytime, but that anytime doesn't happen, right? So let's see the example of considerate communication. Again, you're going to start with him? Yes, okay, perfect.
The guys at the office are organizing a bowling team. I would sure like to be on the team. Would it be a problem if I went to the organizational meeting tomorrow?
That sounds great, but I was hoping we could do something together.
How about you meet me at Kasra and we can have a dinner after the organizational meeting?
That sounds great. I am craving their hummus and kebabs.
So did you guys see what a difference that made? Right? The way that was, thank you so much. Oh, you can have two each. So did that make a difference? The way it was said, did that not make a difference in her reaction? Did you guys feel different when you were saying it?
Of course.
Right?
You feel involved.
You feel involved. You feel like he respected you. So when you're having, it's simple dialogues. It's simple things, guys, that will make the biggest differences. Okay.
I will add too that the dialogue, the second one, which was the mindful communication, it was a lot like healthier, it was kinder.
Yes.
But I feel like even for myself, it would take me a second to present things that way.
Yes.
Because like you said, we're so used to like, this is what I want to do and I'm going to do it right now, or this is the plan, and not taking your partner or your daughter, your child in mind. And so I think like from this whole presentation, what I'm getting is that you have to take a second before communicating, right? You have to actually be very intentional. You have to focus a little bit before you're having these kind of like more, not serious conversations, but just conversations that involve someone else. Is that not just kind of like the natural way that we're used to, or maybe, and I think for a lot of us, the way we talk is how we were raised, right?
Yes.
The way our parents talk to us, we learned to talk that way. Even if we didn't like it, we realize sometimes, oh, sorry, okay, I made the same mistake. Oh, sorry. Okay, is this okay?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what to do. Okay, sorry. Okay. Yes, so for a lot of us, the way we were raised is how we end up learning how to communicate, and then we communicate that way with our friends, with our partners, with whoever it is. So sometimes we actually have to unlearn the things that we've learned, and then we kind of like relearn a new language, and it sounds like scary and intense, but once you start kind of practicing these skills, like they actually work. They actually work. Just learning a few tools and then trying to implement them and then learning other tools, they actually work. You see a difference in your relationship.
So you know, Sarah, we see a lot of kids too that say, our parents are always saying no, or our parents are never listening to us. But you know what? A lot of times the way, I'm going to dinner tomorrow with my friends. What does that do? If your 16-year-old comes and tells you, and you're just like, what? You're going where? You're going nowhere. You're not even listening to what they're saying because of the way they said it. Instead of saying, my friends are going for dinner tomorrow, is it okay if I join them? It's been so long since I've seen them. See, the difference in how you say it will change how your parents respond. It's not just between couples. It's between children and older children, teenagers, and parents as well. Or even if a parent tells a child, you're doing this, right? Instead of respecting their autonomy, that, you know what, if you're done with your homework, if you're done with what you need to do, can you help me with this? It makes a difference.
Right, and I think that goes back to the fact that we're not I and you anymore. It's we. And
You learned it.
The thing is yeah, of course. The thing is, with young couples, they still are in the phase of the single guy life or the single girl life, and they still need to be trained and coached on how to actually be a couple, and which means that you need to really communicate your plans. Nobody says that you don't have a life of your own, because it's not healthy to be always like connected with your wife all the time, because what is healthy is that you really are able to build a relationship with your wife and still have a life of your own, and your wife has a life of her own.
Yes.
And that's healthier, because sometimes you need break from each other, by having your own activities, so you can come back and miss your wife. And
Yeah.
so,
And if you learn that.
But communicating your plans and communicating your time is important. The Prophet ﷺ actually mentioned that when you come from a travel, don't surprise your wife. At that time, he said, go to the masjid first and let people know that you're here. So you go there and surprise her, that's a problem. And here, you don't have to do it. You just call her and say, hey, I'm on my way.
Yeah.
You know, so it's important that you really let your wife know that you're on your way. So if she is not, presentable, she'll become presentable. Yeah.
And as a child, and a very good point, thank you so much for sharing that, because even as a child or as a teenager, if you learn that in your family, and you learn to respect the relationships, then you will carry it forward when you're in
Right.
that couple
Yeah.
relationship. So, last thing about this is intrapersonal communication. I know it's been long, so we're almost done. What is intrapersonal communication? Can anybody tell me?
Entrapment?
Guys.
You said
I
entrapment?
know it's after Isha.
Intrapersonal.
Chocolates?
Interpersonal. I thought you said entrapment.
Intrapersonal.
Interpersonal, yes.
Nobody likes chocolates here. I guess I'm the only chocolate lover then. Yes. So intrapersonal communication is the conversation you have with yourself. And believe me, this is more important than the conversation you have with
Intrapersonal, yes. It's
Yes.
like self-talk.
self-talk.
Yeah.
So it is the conversation you have with yourself, and it is so much more. It can be just as important, or even more important than the conversation you have with others, because guess what? You live with yourself, and the way you self-talk is how you're going to talk to others. It's going to change your perception of yourself. So there's 3 things that are important to understand in intrapersonal communication. There's self-awareness, how you view yourself, your perception, and also your expectations. So self-awareness is how you view yourself. Perception is how you process and interpret information. So a lot of times what I'm saying to you guys, each of you will have your own perception from your own experiences of what I'm saying, right? So how you perceive things is a big, it depends on what you feel or how you feel about yourself. And it's very important for you to know yourself, your values, your attitudes, your beliefs. If you understand yourself, you're able to assertively communicate to others too. Then you won't be like, oh, I don't know. Oh my God, I'm so tired of hearing this from kids especially. I don't know, I don't care. No, you need to know. Know yourself. Take that time to become self-aware. Understand yourself. It is very, very important.
And I think it goes back to a person knowing how to set boundaries for themselves.
Yes.
And we always say, someone who has no boundaries cannot build a relationship. And someone who has rigid boundaries cannot build a relationship either. So it
Yes.
has to be flexible, but there has to be boundaries where you can communicate them to your spouse. Say, these are my values.
Excellent point.
Yes.
How many have boundaries here? How many of you have boundaries?
I have.
Okay, because we have a workshop on that too. It's so important to have boundaries. It is so important in everything. So,
Can you define boundaries?
so boundaries are your scope of what you are able to take. So when you create those, and they're different with different people. So you have your boundaries with your spouse, you have your boundaries with your friends, you have your boundaries with yourself. If you don't have boundaries, you'll say yes to everything, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I can do this, and then you get burnt out, you get tired, you get irritated because you didn't want to say yes, but you didn't have boundaries to say no. But you have, if you clearly communicate that I can only I can only work till 5 p.m. Sorry, after that, it's my boundary, it's my family time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And they say your first boundary is your skin.
Yeah.
And that's what shapes you,
Beautiful.
right?
I love it.
If you don't have boundaries, you have no shape. You're faceless. People will not respect you at all because you're like an amoeba, right? no boundaries. So boundaries is what makes you who you are, what makes you that Muslim husband, what makes you that Muslim brother. You have values, you have things to allow and things you don't allow. So that's, yes.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you. That was beautiful. Another thing I want to tell you about perception is that a lot of times our mind creates these thinking errors, which changes our perception. So what are thinking errors? There's a lot of thinking errors, but two that I really think are important are ignoring the good and mind reading. So ignoring the good is when, have you heard that saying that if you have a white sheet and there's only one black spot, where does your eye go to? To the black spot, right? You ignore everything else. So if you had a test and you couldn't answer one question, what are you going to be thinking about for 2 days? That one question that you couldn't do, instead of all the other questions that you did correctly. And that is with everyday things, right? Instead of looking at what you did do, or when your child brings home a report card, what are you going to notice? The C, not the 6 A's, right? So when you point that out, you're constantly bringing that negative into their life. So they only remember the negative, instead of appreciating that, you know what? That's so good that you got these A's. Okay, let's take a look at the C and see how we can change that to an A as well, right? Instead of, how could you get a C? I mean, couldn't you tell me if you didn't understand math? Right? And that's all the conversation becomes about. You ignore the good. And in your head, that child, that's all they're doing. They're thinking about the bad. They're not thinking about the good. And mind reading. What is mind reading? When you believe when someone else is thinking, you know what they're thinking and why they're thinking it. So if somebody's sitting alone in the cafeteria, they're thinking, oh my God, everybody that comes, they're thinking I'm such a loser. They're thinking I don't have any friends. I know they're thinking this. And you retreat inside yourself. Guess what? They're not even thinking about you. They don't know. They don't think that you have no friends. We become so self-involved that we think that the whole world is thinking about us. You see somebody come in, a friend come in, and they've had a bad day. So they have a frown on their face. Oh my God, she's mad at me. She's mad at me, I know she's mad at me. No, she had a bad day. She has her own issues. It has nothing to do with you. But in your head, it has everything to do with you. And so that's why a lot of kids and a lot of people, they just retreat within themselves. Okay, expectations. Expectations are thoughts and hopes of a specific outcome. And expectations are important in relationships. It's very important to have expectations in relationships, whether it's parent-child, whether it's husband and wife. The important thing is not to have unrealistic expectations and to communicate your expectations. So what are different types of unrealistic expectations? And quickly, what do you think is an unrealistic expectation? What do you think? Anybody?
They should know how you're feeling.
Excellent. She should know. We've been married for 10 years. She should already know how I'm feeling. She should know this. But a lot of times she doesn't know that. How hard is it to communicate? So for example, if the husband comes home from work and he feels like he should have a hot meal ready, she should know this. She should know that I didn't have lunch, that I'm really tired, and she should have the meal ready. So sometimes she has a meal ready, and sometimes she doesn't, because this expectation's never been communicated. So whenever she doesn't, he's always angry, he gets upset, because in his head he's thinking, she should know that I need this, and she's ignoring me, she's not doing what's supposed to be doing, and in her head, she's thinking, why is he always so angry? Because you had this conversation in your own head. Mm-hmm. What happens when you communicate those expectations is that, you know what, I don't have lunch, so when I come home, I would like a hot meal ready. And then the wife, that's a chance for dialogue because,
Right.
well, that's okay for me for Monday and Wednesday, but you know what? Tuesdays and Thursdays, I also have a busy day. So how about we eat out or we order in? You open that communication and that dialogue instead of thinking things in your head. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes. With men, sometimes it's very, I agree with you 100%. And it takes a lot of training, honestly, especially for men. It's the, what do you call it, the emotional intelligence thing. I'm not saying that men are not emotionally intelligent, but I'm saying that men are raised when they were boys to suppress emotions, and that is a problem. So my advice to every couple that come and talk to me about what they need to do, I say to the wife, teach him how to express his emotions. Sometimes really you need to allow your wife to teach you. You need to allow your wife to influence you in that aspect. Just like she may need you in other aspects. So it is like a complementary marriage in one way, where it's like interdependence rather than the wife always on the receiving end and the husband always in the transmitting end. He's transmitting all of his anger, because that is the only emotion men are expert at, is anger, because they were praised when they were angry as children. But sadness and crying, they will say, oh, stop crying. You're a man, don't cry. So it's important for the sisters to realize that you can easily teach your husband how to express his feelings. He has feelings.
And your sons too.
Yes. And your son, definitely. He has feelings. It's just they don't have the vocabulary. Honestly, it's just as simple as that sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then another expectations is that we should always agree or we should always do everything together. No, that doesn't have to be. Again, like we learn, you can agree to disagree. You can do things separately, like Sheikh said, but also be open. So with that, I'm going to conclude this presentation. There's a whole fair fighting rules that I've given you guys. But I realize that that's going to take a long time. But do look at it, and inshallah next time we can discuss fair fighting techniques. I hope you guys learned the importance of active listening and how to be assertive in your communication. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Round of applause, inshallah. That was an amazing presentation. Jazakallah khair to Sister Sadaf. Who here felt like they benefited from this presentation? I know I did for sure. Yes, chocolates for everyone. So we'll go ahead and have our panel part of today's session. It'll just be like 10-15 minutes. I know we're getting closer to that 1 hour time. And so we'll start off with Sheikh Ibrahim. Jazakallah khair for your input so far throughout the presentation. We always like to hear about the Islamic perspective of what we're discussing. And so just from your own wealth of knowledge and experience working with couples, with students, with adults, what can you tell us from our Sunnah, from the Quran, of some strategies or principles regarding communicating effectively? Things that maybe the Prophet ﷺ taught us, or things that are mentioned in the Quran that could be useful for us to know.
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much for this. Communication is actually what marriage is, honestly. I mean, marriage is, if you can say, because communication is not just verbal. There's non-verbal communication. There are so much that you can convey without even saying a word, by your body language, by your tone of voice, by your touch, by your eye contact, all of this. And truthfully, all of this the Prophet ﷺ practiced. And he shared with his wives, and shared with his friends, and shares with his children. So the basic important part of communication is that words are very important in Islam, and words are a responsibility. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu ittaqullaha wa qulu qawlan sadida. O you who believe, fear Allah, be mindful of Him, and say a word of, or the statements that should come out of you should serve a truthful and honest purpose. Al-qawl al-sadid doesn't mean just abject truth or pure or mere sheer truth. No, the truth could hurt. Do you say the truth? No. The truth means here it really hits the purpose, and the purpose for a positive outcome. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised, especially this ayah is recited every time the Prophet ﷺ, officiated over a marriage, advising the couple with this ayah, meaning that, You really need to stick to the truth, and if you do so, Allah will correct all of your affairs and make it where it's an accountability issue, that you are accountable to that. And I was actually talking to the students today about one dua that we say every day, which is Allahumma afini fi badani, Allahumma afini fi sam'i, Allahumma afini fi basari. We say that every day, every morning in the school. Oh Allah, protect me in my body, like keep me healthy, and then protect me in my hearing and protect me in my seeing. What does it mean? Does it mean to protect my ears and eyes? A lot of people think that way. No. It means that we cannot control what we hear and we cannot control what we see, but we can control the way they affect us. And especially with your spouse. Sometimes you can't control what they say to you. So how do you react to them? So you're accountable for the way you react to your spouse when you hear them say something that is negative, for example, or the way you react to what you see, if it's something bad that you see, how it affects your marriage. So it's accountability. So that's the first thing that we really find, is that you are accountable for every word and every communication that you transmit to anyone, not just to your spouse. So I'll just begin with this and see.
Beautiful, thank you. And I'm sure there is so many more that you can, inshallah, bring up throughout. So tell us also about, so we know in maybe like the Western world and in the secular world, there is an idea that even more than boundaries, that if someone isn't serving you, if you have like a family member that, you know, they're bothering you or it's hard to deal with, just cut them off. And don't talk to them again, just cut them off until they change or whatever happens. We know obviously in Islam that is not the case, and it's very stressed in our religion to maintain ties with family. So could you tell us a little bit, like what is the importance of maintaining ties with family? Are there rewards for that? Why is it so kind of like emphasized in our religion? Obviously in cases where there is like no abuse or...
Yes. Well, we have to understand that family are here to stay. You cannot just divorce your family at all. Even if you divorce your wife, your children will continue to be your children, right? You will still have a relationship with your ex-wife that is based on mercy, that's based on respect, mutual interest between co-parenting, on things like this. So in Islam, to sever the ties of kinship is completely haram. You cannot sever the ties of kinship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described it as one of the acts of the fasiqeen, الذين ينقضون عهد الله بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل. Those who are rebellious, Allah is talking to them that they are the ones who not only do they sever their tie with Allah, but also sever the ties that Allah commanded be always tied, which is the ties of kinship. Family. You cannot really just divorce your family. You have to stay with your family. You have to work on them. And the fact that you say, I can't change them, you're not supposed to change them. You don't have the power to change them. Nuh alayhi salam could not change his son. Nuh alayhi salam, his son was not a believer. He couldn't change him. What you need to do is provide the environment for change. Provide the environment that will help them change. Show them how to change. But you can't even change your wife at all. If the notion that you are in a marriage trying to change your spouse, that is not a good notion, because if they don't choose to change, then there's no relationship. There is actually a person who is completely absorbed by another person. That's not a marriage. That is servitude. And marriage is not servitude. So this is another issue. So no, cutting the ties of kinship is completely haram in Islam. The other thing that I would like to share is dua is important in any relationship. Dua is important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. So, you seek Allah's help to protect you and protect your family and have a better conversation and communication with your family by saying, oh Allah, grant us, tranquility in our spouses. Grant us peace in our spouses and our children. Seek Allah because they are created by Allah, and Allah can change their hearts. And I always say the best dua I actually save is from my wife. I mean, this is something that if I know that I have a dua that will be answered, I will do it for my wife. Why? Because when Allah answers my dua for my spouse, my whole life changes, becomes better. So always seek Allah's help in making things better between you and your spouse. And make it where your relationship is not with her, is with Allah, and her relationship is with Allah. When this is the type of relationship you have, you start loving her because she's your spouse and because she's a servant of Allah as well. These things that the shaitan bring about will diminish.
You
Yes.
bring the we into the relationship, and
Yes.
together we're pleasing Allah.
Exactly, yes. Right.
That I love that you added the perspective that we're doing this for Allah, that she is also a servant of Allah. And same with our children, right? They are
Yes.
servants of Allah, so we're going to try our best to treat them in the best way, not just because they're my kids, but because they are Allah's
Right.
servants.
Yes.
So that's very, very helpful. So kind of bringing to more specific questions, a lot of times we know that like parents, right? So let's say they hear about like communicating healthier with your kids, with your spouses, and they want to start communicating better with their kids or whoever it is. But then when they try, or maybe they've made efforts in the past, they feel like their children, their teens, their adult children just don't really communicate back to them. Or maybe they'll ask them questions and they don't open up, they keep it short, they'd rather stay in their room on their phone. What's maybe some advice that we could give to both ends, like the teens so they could open up more, and the parents so they could kind of see like what's going on, why aren't they answering, why aren't they opening up to me? What are some things maybe that you've both experienced through working with parents or students on that end that could be helpful here?
Would you like to start, or should I?
Go ahead, please.
So this is a two-folded question, right? What can parents do and what can teens do? So as parents, it's really important to avoid negative labeling, right? Just like what we had talked about. When we start talking about the negatives, you're automatically putting the kids on defensive. Another thing that a lot of parents say is that, our kids just have yes and no answers. Well, don't give them yes and no questions. Be more specific in your questions. So instead of asking, how was your day, which would be like, fine, that's it. You can be like, oh, I know you had a new kid in class, or something. Oh, I know. What was your teacher like? She was a new teacher. What did you find interesting about her? Or you had anything that can bring conversation, elicit conversation. So a lot of times we put these questions in place which are just, the kids don't want to talk. They have to be made to talk. And the way they can do that is they feel that you're interested. So just like we talked about active listening, stop what you're doing when your child is talking to you. Actively listen to
Right.
them and listen to understand, not
Engage
to
them,
rebut. Yes,
Yes.
go ahead.
Engage them, yes. And I think sometimes you really need to give them a break.
Yeah.
There's an important thing about a child and teenager. The teenager is trying to get out of the nest, which meant that he's trying to distance himself away, be far away from you enough, but then you keep the door open for them so they can come back to you.
Yes.
The idea is that if they don't want to talk, fine, but at least give them the opportunity to feel safe.
Exactly.
That they are safe when they come and talk to you. That they always find, a heart that will always have them.
Welcoming.
That they're not going to be judged. That they're not going to be punished. They're not going to be yelled at and things like this. A lot of times they don't want to talk to you, not because they don't like you or they don't love you, but because they're afraid to lose you. Because they're going to come and talk to you about things that they think you're not going to approve of. Right? You're not gonna, all of us went through teenage stuff and we all did horrible stuff when we were teenagers, and we don't want our parents to know about them. Why? Because we don't want to lose them.
Yeah.
We want to still have that nest ready for us.
Yes.
So the problem is, if they don't want to talk, don't push them to talk.
And
Let them-
control your reactions.
but engage in silly talk with them. They like that.
Yeah.
Engage them in silly talk, fine.
Yeah.
As long as there are guidelines where, yes, they're praying, they're not oppressing anybody, they're not hurting anyone, they're praying. If you hear a curse word every once in a while, it's not the end of the world. It's not an emergency. I know some people may disagree with me, but it will happen. And be forgiving. So I give you an example from the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ. A young man came to the Prophet and he said, I believe in everything and I love Islam. I just love zina. I love to be with women and I love to do that. And that's outrageous. If my son comes to me and tells me that was, who raised you? What's wrong with you, right? But this man came to the Prophet, this young man came to the Prophet ﷺ and told him, I love women, I love to be with women. What did the Prophet do? He didn't chastise him. He didn't chew him out. He didn't tell him, get out of here, No. He sat him right beside him and he says, young man, do you like it for your mother? He said, no. So he told him, he's reasoning with him. He said, likewise, people don't like it for their mother. Do you like it for your sister? No, I don't. And for your daughter. And the Prophet started mentioning these women who he himself is protecting. He's protecting them from men like him. So he remembered, oh, I'm doing something bad here. I don't think I'm being fair. He's reasoning. So the Prophet added to it the aspect of dua. And he made dua for him. So you make dua for your young man. You reason with him. You talk to him because they're not really belligerent. They're not evil. They're just confused. And they have a lot of hormones that they want to deal with and they can't deal with. So they need an understanding parent that will not shut the door against them and say, go, I don't know you, I have nothing to do with you. They don't want that. They're afraid of that. Once they give them that safety, they will always come to you and tell you, Dad, I'm sorry, but I said the F word a couple of times today. My son, this is wrong. Don't approve it. Don't tell him this is right. Don't say, funny, no. But at the same time, don't make it the end of the world for them.
It's very important to control your reactions, just like the Prophet
Yes, thank you.
did. And also validation. Make sure that you're validating your child. You're making them feel like they're understood, that it's okay. I understand your feelings.
Excellent point, yes.
You know, but this is a better way of doing things, or but we don't do things this way, or however you want to explain it. But first, validate them and make sure that you're not just, oh my goodness. You know, if your reaction is one of shock or surprise or anger or fear, just like Sheikh said, I mean, beautiful, beautiful explanation.
I mean, we're afraid, they're afraid to lose us. They're afraid to lose their parents. That is the worst thing that they could think of, is losing the parent. That my father will never approve of me. They always want you to be proud of them, always.
And life is very hard for children these days. Before, if you would, like when I was growing up, if my mom didn't want me to do something, she would send me to my room or whatever, and I would be in my room. But now, when the kids are in their room, they're still exposed to the stuff that's going on. So they can still see the party. They can still see what else is happening. And it's constantly in their face. If they're being bullied, the bullying doesn't stop at school. It continues at home. It continues. You know, we had a call, like, I know Dr. Hamdan had mentioned that somebody had called and he was, you know, he wanted to commit suicide. He wanted to kill himself. And when she asked, "Where are you?" he said, "I'm in my room." She said, "Where are your parents?" He said, "They're outside." So you're not safe anymore anywhere, because you can be in your own room and exposed to so much
Right.
that you're ready to take your own life. So kids have a lot of stuff going on. Give them that safe space at home. It's really important.
I think that was summary of that is that you being that safe person for your
Exactly,
child
yes.
is, I think, just like, I mean, I always, when I think of that story and just how the young boy went to the Prophet ﷺ to tell him something like that none of us, I think, would be able to do to like
Yeah.
someone we know in the community.
Right, yeah.
But that's because the Prophet, he knew that his reaction would be calm. He
Yeah.
knew that he wouldn't be judged and dismissed or belittled or any way. So I think it's something that we have to
the man-
consciously work
The
on.
young man came seeking a solution, seeking help,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
You don't
yeah.
just shun him because of that.
Yeah.
I would like to share another thing from part one, which is Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used to speak love and peace. The type of language that he used was one of love and peace. It was not, like you said, aggressive language. Even with assertive language, he still would say it lovingly. Like you said, I like what you said, is that when you disagree with someone, disagree with respect. Just when you disagree, when you hate someone, hate them with class, hate them with, with kindness, right? And that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when He said, and it's amazing that whenever I read this ayah, I say it's really amazing because it's mentioning the worst case scenario between a husband and wife where they become enemies of each other, right? He says, يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن من أزواجكم وأولادكم عدوا لكم فاحذروهم وإن تعفوا وتصفحوا وتغفروا فإن الله غفور رحيم. The ayah says, oh believers, indeed in your spouses you may find animosity. In your spouses and children, they may be enemies for you. So beware, meaning beware, be careful how you treat them. And what he said, don't shun him. He said, وَإِن تَعْفُوا, if you pardon them. تَصْفَحُوا, another level of pardon. تَغْفِرُوا, forgive them. Allah indeed is all forgiving, all merciful. The idea is, even when you disagree with your spouse to the point where you think that she's your enemy, many of us may think that way sometimes, right? Still speak peace, speak forgiveness. Be on the side of forgiveness, be on the side of love. Another thing that the Prophet ﷺ expressed his love with or communicated his love is touch. A lot of us underestimate the value of touch. Touch can do so much more so than words. The Prophet ﷺ, even when his wife would be in her menses and she is in pain, he would spoon hug her, meaning, embrace her from behind her to give her that comfort, to communicate his love to her. Things that word may not even convey, because touch is really important. It's the best way of communicating your love towards your spouse. So, yes, the language of love and peace is very important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ لِعِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. Tell my servants to say what is best. Let them make their best choice of words. إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنْزَغُ بَيْنَهُم. Indeed, Satan is just ready for them to stir something. Like we said, if you say something negative, Shaitan will get to her or him and start thinking, oh, she hates you. Oh, she might be hiding something. Oh, this and that, right? And the Shaitan, his best plan is to break a marriage. And Allah is telling you, in order for you to resist Shaitan, make your choice of words the best choice. Yes.
That is a great takeaway. A great takeaway that we could leave with is that for all of us, inshallah, to leave today with the intention that we want to learn to use the best of words, right? Even if it doesn't come natural to us or if it's ways that we've learned from the past, we want to relearn some new ways to, inshallah, speak more gently and calmly. I know we're finishing up here, so I want to open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions for any of the panelists up here, or if anyone has any suggestions or like advice of things that have worked for them when it comes to communication. Any like communication tools or tips maybe that you've tried that have worked for you in your relationships and your family. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. That's fine.
I mean, something that I do all the time, and it really helps a lot,
Yeah.
Is that when I think there might be a conflict or a disagreement, before I attempt to talk to my wife, I question myself, what is my contribution to this disagreement? What am I doing that is causing this? Because it might be me, not her, right? Sometimes our self-esteem and our ego, it's called ego boundary, that we really your ego make you where you try to wall yourself off. Sometimes your ego will make you think that the other person is causing this to you, but in fact, it could be you. So that worked a lot for me, is I remember the good things that she does, and I remember the bad things that I do. And believe me, when I put the little disagreement in that balance, I say, that disagreement is really insignificant compared to the great things that she does and the horrible things that I do. So it's not like, putting myself down, but it is a good mechanism to realize the value of this relationship.
And you said as you said, you can't change somebody else.
Yes.
You can change yourself though.
Yes.
Right? That is what you
Exactly.
can do. You can do it yourself. So
Right.
yes, thank you.
I love that. That's a really, really good tip. Yes. Okay. Okay. Everyone
So
here?
when you create those boundaries, it's very important that you communicate them effectively.
Yes.
A lot of times we have these boundaries, but we haven't communicated them effectively to the other person, giving it the importance that, this is important to me. Because if that person feels that you're important to them and they understand your boundaries, they've been communicated properly, then they will respect them. And it breaks. A lot of times the boundaries do break.
Yeah.
So when it happens, you deal with it one at a time.
Right.
So,
You don't have to say, oh, let's sit down and
Yes.
I'm going to tell you my boundaries right now. No,
Yeah.
it's just as life goes on.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that like in terms of like boundaries, they say when you're setting the boundary, you also want to set what will happen if the boundary is not respected, right?
Consequences,
Not
yeah.
like a threat, but more like for example, if you have a boundary with someone that if you start yelling at me when we're having a discussion, like I'm not okay with that. That's my boundary. So then the follow-up would be, and if you are doing that, I'm gonna have to walk away just because I'm gonna need
Right,
a break.
good.
I'm gonna need some time. So kind of letting them know if you don't respect that boundary, I would love for you to. If you don't, this is what's gonna happen because I'm not gonna be able to like tolerate or feel okay in this situation. Of course, with every relationship, it's different. You can't always do that with everyone, but that's usually what we hear in terms of like boundary setting, things like that.
And
Thank you for the question. Excellent question.
And in marriage, actually, you come to the marriage with your own boundaries. Your spouse comes with their own boundaries. And now once you will have to actually adjust and be flexible, see what boundaries will change, what boundaries will remain, what
Communicate.
new boundaries will actually emerge, and it becomes the marriage boundaries.
Yeah.
So you'll become with 3 types of boundaries, you, her, and us.
Yes, beautiful. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you, everyone. I think we'll wrap it up here. Thank you all for staying through the entire presentation. And inshallah, we all benefited from this and we start using these tools in practice. And thank you so much, Sister Sadaf, for coming from